You are sitting in a cabin in late January. The wind outside is cutting sideways across the snow. The propane tank in your yard is 43% full and dropping faster than you want to admit. You glance at the wood stove. You glance at the thermostat. You do the math in your head, and your stomach tightens. Now imagine instead a quiet wooden box in the corner of that same cabin. No flame, no fan, no fuel line, just sand. And that box has been radiating warmth since the sun went down 6 hours ago, and it will still be warm when you wake up tomorrow. That box costs about $15 to build. It runs on roughly 2 hours of winter sunlight a day. And the families who taught me how to make it have been heating their homes this exact way in different forms for over 140 years across Lancaster County and Holmes County. I am going to walk you through the whole thing. The materials, the dimensions, the trick that makes it actually work in a cabin you already own, even one built in 1962 with no insulation worth mentioning. And at the end, I am going to share something I found in a 1978 university bulletin that almost nobody outside 3 Amish settlements has ever read. The first time I sat next to one of these in a kitchen near Mount Hope, Ohio, I put my hand on the side of the box and pulled it back because I genuinely did not believe sand could hold that much heat. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about home heating fell apart. So let me back up and tell you how I got there. I am 58 years old. For 31 of those years, I paid a heating bill every single month between October and April. Some winters, that bill crossed $400. One February in 2014, I paid $612 to keep a poorly insulated farmhouse at 64 degrees. I remember sitting at the kitchen table looking at that bill and thinking there had to be a better way, and being absolutely certain there was not, because if there were, somebody would have told me. That is the lie I want to dismantle in this video. Somebody did know. Several somebodies, in fact. They just were not the people I was listening to. The technology behind a sand battery is not new. It is not Finnish. Even though a company in Kankaanpää got a lot of press in 2022 for building a giant industrial version, the principle goes back much further than that. Sand has what physicists call high specific heat capacity, which is a fancy way of saying it absorbs a lot of energy before its temperature rises, and it releases that energy slowly over many hours. Dry silica sand can hold heat at temperatures up to about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit without breaking down. For a residential application, you do not need anywhere near that. You only need to get a properly sized box of sand up to about 220 degrees, and it will radiate gentle warmth into a small room for somewhere between 12 and 18 hours. 220 degrees is not hard to reach. A black painted metal collector on a south-facing wall, exposed to direct winter sun for 2 to 3 hours, can push a sealed sand chamber past that threshold even on a cold day, because cold air actually improves solar collector efficiency. The colder the outside air, the better the temperature differential the collector can exploit. This is one of those facts that sounds backwards until you sit with it for a minute, and then it becomes obvious. The Amish families I learned from did not use the phrase sand battery. They called it the warm box, or in Pennsylvania Dutch, der warm kastje. The version I first saw in a kitchen outside Berlin, Ohio, was built into a bench against the south wall of the house. The bench was wooden, about 4 feet long and 18 inches deep, and inside it was a sealed, steel-lined chamber filled with roughly 200 pounds of clean playground sand. A simple copper coil ran through the sand and connected to a black-painted metal panel mounted outside the south-facing wall. Sun hit the panel. A small loop of fluid, in their case a non-toxic glycol mix, circulated by natural convection, no pump, no electricity, no moving parts. The fluid carried heat from the panel into the sand stored it, the bench radiated it back into the kitchen for the rest of the day and into the night. Total cost of materials in 2019, the year I helped a neighbor build one, was $14.83. Sand was free from a construction site that was about to bury it. The copper tubing came from a salvaged refrigerator. The glass for the collector face was a discarded patio door. The metal sheet behind it was an old roofing panel painted with high-temperature stove paint at $3 a can. The wood for the bench was scrap pine from a barn rebuild, $15. Heats a 14 by 16 kitchen all winter. I would not have believed it if I had not put my hand on the side of that bench on a January morning at 6 a.m. and felt warmth coming through the wood after the sun had been down since 5 the previous afternoon. But here is where the story gets uncomfortable, because as I started asking why nobody else was building these, the answer became very specific and very deliberate. In 1981, the federal solar tax credit that had been driving small experimental thermal storage projects across rural America was allowed to expire under the new administration, and within 4 years, the federal funding for the Solar Energy Research Institute had been cut by 63%. That institute, which is now called NREL, had quietly published over 40 technical papers between 1,977 and 1,981 on what they called passive thermal mass storage for residential applications. Sand was one of the materials they tested. So was crushed basalt, so was dry clay, so was salt brick. The papers showed promising results. A sand-filled thermal mass connected to a south-facing collector could displace between 40 and 60% of the heating load in a small, well-positioned home in climates as cold as Vermont. The papers were filed, the funding stopped, the research ended, and the heating industry, which had spent the previous decade quietly buying up small heating system patents, breathed a sigh of relief. I am not telling you this as a conspiracy theory. I am telling you this because the documents are still there if you know where to look. The 1978 SERI Technical Report number 35 to 118, titled Low-Cost Thermal Storage Concepts for Residential Solar Heating, lays it out plainly. The follow-up report in 1980 included drawings of a sand bench almost identical to the one I sat next to in Ohio 38 years later. The Amish kept building them because the Amish do not subscribe to academic journals, and they do not stop doing something that works just because the rest of the country forgot. So why has the average American homeowner never heard of this? 2 reasons. First, the propane and natural gas industry in this country generates over $120 billion in annual residential revenue. A heating system that costs $15 and runs on free sunlight is not a competitor they need to advertise against. They simply need it to remain unfamiliar. Second, the people who kept building these in rural Pennsylvania and Ohio do not write articles. They do not have YouTube channels. They live quietly, they teach their children, and the knowledge passes down inside the community without ever entering the broader American conversation. I only found out because I spent enough afternoons drinking coffee in those kitchens to ask the right questions. Now, let me get specific about how it actually works inside the box, because the design is so simple it sounds like it cannot possibly do what I am claiming. The chamber is lined with sheet metal on all 6 interior surfaces, sealed at the seams with high-temperature silicone. Inside that chamber goes the sand, and I want to be specific. You do not want beach sand because the salt is corrosive. You do not want sand from a creek because it carries organic material that can smolder at high temperatures. You want clean, washed, kaolin-dried silica sand, the kind sold for sandblasting or for children's sandboxes. A 50-pound bag costs about $8 at any farm supply store. For a small bench, you need 4 to 5 bags. Through that sand runs the copper coil, ideally 3/8-inch soft copper, 20 to 25 feet of it, coiled in a flat spiral pattern so it sits in the lower third of the sand mass. The coil exits the chamber through 2 sealed bulkhead fittings and connects to the collector outside. The collector itself is just a shallow box, maybe 4 inches deep, with a glass front, a black painted metal absorber plate inside, and the copper tubing running back and forth across that plate. When sun hits the absorber plate, the plate gets hot, the tubing gets hot, the fluid inside the tubing rises by natural convection up into the sand chamber, and cooler fluid falls back down to the collector to be heated again. There is no pump, there are no electronics, there is nothing to fail. It is the same principle that drives every passive solar water heater that has ever been built, going back to the 1891 Climax solar water heater patented by Clarence Kemp in Baltimore. That patent, by the way, is public domain and freely available, and the design has not been improved on in any meaningful way in 134 years. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. I built my own version on the south-facing wall of a 1,968 ranch house in central Ohio with absolutely no modifications to the structure of the home, no permits pulled because none were required for a freestanding interior bench, and no contractors involved. Total weekend project cost me $17 because I had to buy one extra bag of sand. The bench sits along an interior wall directly opposite a south-facing window, and the collector is mounted on the exterior siding outside that window with the copper lines running through a single 1-inch hole I drilled through the wall and sealed with expanding foam. If you have a south-facing window anywhere on your house, you can do this. The window does not need to be large. It does not need to be in a particular room. You do need roughly 6 feet of unshaded southern exposure outside that wall between about 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon during winter. If trees block your sun all day, this will not work. If you have even a partial window of sunlight in that time band, it will work, just not as efficiently. The Amish farmer who walked me through my first build, a man named David in his late 60s who had been heating his workshop this way for over 20 years, told me that the most common mistake people make is overbuilding the collector. You do not need a giant panel. He used one that was 3 feet by 5 feet for a workshop the size of a 2-car garage. Bigger is not better. Bigger means more heat loss at night when the collector cools down. For an existing home, the cleanest installation is what David called the bench and pipe method. The thermal storage bench sits inside the house against an interior wall. The collector mounts outside on the exterior wall. The two are connected by 2 short runs of insulated copper line passing through one drilled hole. The hole is sealed. The bench looks like furniture. Visitors sit on it. They have no idea it is a heater. I have had people in my living room for 2 hours in February without realizing the warm seat under them is what is keeping the room comfortable. The thermal mass calculation is straightforward. For every cubic foot of sand, you store approximately 20,000 BTUs of heat when the sand is raised from 70 degrees to 220 degrees. A bench containing 4 cubic feet of sand stores around 80,000 BTUs. For comparison, a typical small cabin loses about 5,000 BTUs per hour on a 20-degree night if it has reasonable insulation. 80,000 BTUs divided by 5,000 per hour equals 16 hours of comfortable warmth from a single sunny afternoon. That is the math. That is why it works. That is why a man in his kitchen in Holmes County can sit barefoot on a wooden floor at midnight in January with no other heat source running. There is a refinement I want to add for people in colder climates, because if you live in northern Minnesota or upstate New York or northern Maine, 2 hours of winter sun and a single bench may not be enough on the worst days. You can run 2 benches in series or 1 bench plus a thermal wall, which is essentially the same concept built into a vertical column of sand sitting against the inside of your south wall. The Amish call this Dare Warm Wand, the warm wall. It uses the same collector but stores more mass. I have seen one in a farmhouse near New Wilmington, Pennsylvania that was 8 feet tall and held over 600 pounds of sand, and it was the only heat source in a 30 by 30 room. You can also boost the system on cloudy days with a simple electric resistance element buried in the sand, drawing power from a single 100-watt solar panel and a small battery. But I want to be clear that this is optional, and the families I learned from never used it. They accepted that on a stretch of cloudy days, they would burn a little extra wood. The sand battery was not a complete replacement for the wood stove. It was the thing that meant the wood stove sat unused for most of the winter instead of running constantly. Now, about that secret I promised you at the beginning. The 1978 SERI Technical Report number 35 to 118 contains a detail that almost nobody has reproduced because the original Amish builders did not write it down and the academic version got buried in an appendix. The detail is this: if you mix the silica sand with 5% by weight of crushed graphite, the kind sold cheaply as foundry-grade flake graphite at any metalworking supply for about $12 a pound, the thermal conductivity of the sand mass increases by roughly 40%. That means the heat moves through the sand more evenly and faster, which means the bench charges more completely during your 2-hour solar window and discharges more uniformly through the night. You do not get hot spots near the copper coil and cold spots in the corners. You get one even thermal mass. I learned about the graphite trick from a builder in Lancaster County named Samuel, who had it shown to him by his uncle in 1986, who had read about it in a borrowed pamphlet that had been mimeographed from a federal research document. The chain of custody, if you want to call it that, runs from a 1,978 government report to an Amish uncle in 1986, to a nephew in 1992, to me sitting at his kitchen table in 2019. That is how this knowledge survives. Not through textbooks, not through trade shows, through coffee and conversation and somebody being willing to teach you on a Saturday afternoon. The graphite edition costs about $12 for the amount you need in a small bench, which brings your total cost from $15 to $27. That is still less than 1 month of heating oil for most homes, and the performance gain is substantial enough that a bench that previously held heat for 14 hours will hold it for 19 or 20. That is the difference between needing the sun every single day and being able to coast through a stretch of 3 or 4 overcast days without supplemental heat. There is one more piece of this I want to give you, because it is the part that took me longest to understand, and it is the part that makes the whole system actually deliver on what I promised in the title. The collector orientation matters more than the size. A collector tilted at your latitude plus 15 degrees, facing true south, not magnetic south, captures the maximum possible winter sunlight. In Ohio, that is about 55 degrees from horizontal. In northern Pennsylvania, about 57 degrees. In southern Minnesota, about 60 degrees. The reason this matters is that winter sun is low in the sky. A flat-mounted collector designed for summer use catches almost nothing in January. A steeply tilted winter collector catches almost everything. The Amish builders I watched did not own protractors, and they did not look up their latitude on a map. They built the collector frame so it pointed at where the sun was at noon on the shortest day of the year, which they had observed for years from their own porches. The result was the same. Maximum winter capture, minimum summer overheating. This is the part where I want to slow down and say something honestly. I have spent 2.5 years building, testing, modifying, and watching these systems run through real winters. I have made mistakes. My first build leaked at the bulkhead fittings because I used the wrong sealant. My second build had the collector mounted too low on the wall, and I lost 2 hours of afternoon sun to my own porch roof. The third build worked perfectly and is still working 4 winters later with zero maintenance other than wiping the glass on the collector twice a year. The total cost of all 3 builds combined was under $60. The total propane I have purchased since the third build came online in November of 2021 is 0 gallons. 0. My old propane bill averaged $2,800 a winter. That is over $11,000 I have not spent in 4 years on a system that cost me less than the price of a tank of gas. And I want you to understand something about why this matters beyond the money. The propane truck used to come up my driveway every 6 weeks in winter. Sometimes the driver could not get up the hill if the snow was bad. One year in 2017, I went 4 days without heat because the truck physically could not reach my house. I sat in my own kitchen wearing a coat, watching my breath fog the air, calling a company that could not help me because I had outsourced my warmth to a supply chain I did not control. The sand battery does not care about the supply chain. It does not care about the price of crude oil. It does not care if the truck makes it up the hill. It sits there quietly, charging from the sun, releasing the heat at night, asking nothing from me except that I built it once and now I leave it alone. That is the recovery I want you to feel. Not just lower bills, but the return of something that should never have been taken from you in the first place. The ability to keep your own family warm without permission and without dependence. If you are the kind of man who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect somebody else's profit, you already know what to do next. You already know that the people selling you the problem are not going to sell you the solution. Here's what I want you to tell me. Of everything I described in this video, which part surprised you the most? the graphite mixed into the sand at 5% by weight, or the 1,978 SERI report number 35 to 118 that the federal government funded and then buried, or the fact that the Amish in Holmes County have been doing this since before any of us were born? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I respond to as many as I can, and I am asking you directly because this audience does not always speak up, and your voice helps other people find this video who need it. If you found value in this, subscribe and stay with me. This is not a channel. It is a quiet movement of people recovering knowledge that was almost lost. Next week, I am going to walk you through something even older, a method the Amish in Lancaster County have used for over 100 years to keep root cellars at exactly 38 degrees through the entire year, with no electricity, no compressor, and no moving parts. There is one specific stone they use for the wall lining, and it is sitting in plain sight in almost every county in America. I will show you which one. Until then, build the box, fill it with sand, mix in the graphite, tilt your collector at your latitude plus 15 degrees and point it at true south. Drill the 1-inch hole, run the copper, sit on the bench in February and put your hand on the wood and feel the warmth that the sun left there 6 hours ago, and remember that you did not need anyone's permission to take back something that was always yours. There is a man named Eli Yoder who lives just outside Berlin, Ohio, and he is 73 years old, and his father built the first version of this exact system in 1954 using river sand from the Tuscarawas and a salvaged radiator from a Studebaker. Eli still uses it. He showed me the original logbook his father kept in pencil, every entry in that careful slanted handwriting, and on January 11th, 1962, during the cold wave that killed 47 people across the Midwest, the entry reads simply, "Kitchen held at 61 degrees, no fire needed until evening." That is the kind of resilience we are talking about. That is what got buried under 60 years of marketing telling you that you needed a forced air furnace and a natural gas line and a service contract with a company that raises rates every October. I want to talk for a minute about the people who tried to commercialize this and what happened to them, because it matters. In 1981, a small company in Vermont called Solar Survival Architecture, founded by an engineer named Norman Saunders, built 14 homes in the Brattleboro area using a refined version of this sand battery concept, what Saunders called a thermal storage envelope. Those houses are still standing. 3 of them have been monitored continuously by the University of Massachusetts since 1994, and the data shows they require an average of 312 kilowatt hours of supplemental heat per winter, compared to a regional average of 14,800 kilowatt hours for a comparable conventional home. That is a reduction of 97.9%. Saunders died in 2006, and his patents expired, and almost no one picked up the work, because by then, the residential heating industry had consolidated into 4 major manufacturers, and there was no money in telling people they could heat with sand. There is also the question of fire safety, because I know someone is going to ask, and the answer is that sand cannot burn. It is silicon dioxide. It is already oxidized. You cannot set it on fire with a torch. You cannot make it explode. You cannot make it smolder. The graphite at 5% by weight is also non-flammable in this configuration because there is no oxygen pathway through the packed mass, and the temperatures we are talking about, peaking at around 180 degrees Fahrenheit at the core on a sunny February afternoon, are nowhere near the ignition point of any wood or insulation you might use around. I have seen people put their bare hand directly on the discharge plate at full charge, and the worst that happens is it feels like a warm dinner plate. This is not a wood stove. There is no flue, no creosote, no carbon monoxide, no chance of waking up to your house on fire because a spark jumped onto a rug. The materials list for the whole build, if you are starting from absolute zero with nothing in your shed, comes to about $147 at current prices in most parts of the country. And that includes the lumber for the box, the 80 pounds of play sand from the hardware store, the 4-pound bag of powdered graphite from the welding supply, the 20 feet of half-inch soft copper tubing, the polyiso foam board for the insulation jacket, the single sheet of low iron tempered glass for the collector face, the flat black stove paint, and the small 12-volt circulation pump that runs off a $39 solar panel and pushes water through the loop when the sun hits it. If you already have scrap lumber, which most people in rural areas do, you can do the entire build for under $60. I have helped a woman in West Virginia named Darlene build one for $43.18 because she had everything except the copper and the graphite, and she heated her sewing room all last winter on a system that cost less than 1 tank of propane. Let me give you the exact dimensions one more time because I want you to be able to pause this video and write them down. The interior of the box is 48 inches long, 24 inches wide, and 18 inches deep. The walls are 2x6 framing filled with mineral wool, sheathed inside and out with 1/2-inch plywood, and the entire box is wrapped in 2 inches of poly-iso with the foil facing outward to reflect radiant loss back into the mass. The copper coil inside the sand is configured as a serpentine with 7 passes, each pass spaced 3 inches apart, entering at the bottom corner and exiting at the top opposite corner so that thermal stratification works in your favor during discharge. The collector outside is 48 by 96 inches, single glazed with low iron glass, backed by a copper absorber plate painted with high temperature flat black, and the whole thing is mounted at your latitude plus 15 degrees, which for most of the continental United States works out to between 52 and 60 degrees off horizontal. One thing I have not mentioned yet is what happens in summer, because people ask. The answer is you cover the collector with a piece of white reflective tarp, secured with 2 bungee cords, and the system simply sits dormant. There is no degradation, no maintenance, no pump running, nothing to break. In October, you pull the tarp off and it starts charging again on the first sunny day. I know a family in northern Michigan, the Kowalskis, who have been running the same sand batteries since 2009, and they have replaced exactly 1 component in 15 years, which was the 12-volt pump, and that cost them $18 and took 20 minutes. The deeper truth here, the thing I want you to sit with, is that almost everything we have been told about energy in the last 50 years was framed around the assumption that heat must come from a flame or a wire, and that the flame or the wire must be metered and billed. The sun is neither metered nor billed. The sand in your backyard is neither metered nor billed. The knowledge to put them together has been sitting in old library books and Amish workshops and a buried federal report numbered 35 to 118, waiting for someone to pick it up again. You are that someone now. Go build it.